Hello, dear listeners of late night radio stories. The echo of the radio has always been a companion to loneliness. Especially in the quiet hours of the deep night, when the world seems to be asleep, some people are still awake. Some wake from nightmares, some lie awake with unspoken sorrow. And I, Morgan Hayes, am one of those who stays awake to listen to and recount their stories. My station is nestled deep in Whispering Pines Forest, about a 30-minute drive from the nearest town. A small wooden house converted into a studio with mid-range broadcasting equipment, enough to cover the valley and surrounding hills. By day, this forest is filled with sunlight and birdsong, but when the sun sets, it transforms into a different world, dark, cold, and full of unidentifiable whispers. I came here 5 years ago after leaving my job at a major city radio station. Everyone thought I was crazy then, giving up a rising career to move to a remote place and open a radio station whose only topic was ghost stories. Who would do that? But they didn't understand. They never understood the intense urge within me, the craving to hear true stories about the unexplainable. Not exaggerated tales of monsters or vampires, but real experiences, moments when the line between our world and another becomes blurred. My show airs every night from 12:00 a.m. to 3:00 a.m. Initially, there were only a few random calls, mostly from lonely night drivers or curious insomniacs. But gradually, as word of the show spread, letters and messages started pouring in. I've never told anyone this story. No one believes me, but I know what I saw. It's been 20 years since it happened, but I remember it as if it were yesterday. And so, I began to read those stories on the air, without embellishment, without exaggeration, simply recounting them in my deep voice, echoing into the darkness like a whisper in the ears of those listening. The strange thing is, the more I told, the more stories I received. As if my show had opened a portal, allowing people to confess experiences they had kept secret for so long. And tonight, I want to share with you some of the most memorable stories I've received. Stories with no monsters, no magic, just people and the things they couldn't explain. So, pull up a chair, dim the lights, and listen to the voices from the night. And remember, not every story ends when the teller stops speaking. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Radio Stories. The first story I want to share comes from a letter by a young architect named Oliver Heathrow, who had just moved to a small town in the east. He wrote to me last winter, his handwriting trembling, a tremor I could feel even on paper. Listen to Oliver's story. I still remember vividly the first day I stepped into that house. A 2-story Victorian-style house, over 100 years old, yet still retaining its antique beauty. The price was suspiciously affordable, but at the time, I just thought I was lucky. The real estate agent, Mrs. Stevens, said the previous owner had moved out in a hurry due to family matters. I didn't ask further. The first week was normal. I unpacked, got used to the creaking of the old wooden floors and the pipes groaning whenever I turned on the faucet. It was an old house, and I accepted the strange noises as part of it. But then I started to notice the mirror in the upstairs bathroom. It was a tall, floor-to-ceiling mirror with an intricately carved oak frame. In the morning, when I shaved, nothing seemed unusual. But in the evening, when the lights were dim, I started to feel something was off about that mirror. Initially, it was just a feeling that someone was watching me, a chill down my spine. Every time I turned my back to the mirror, I told myself it was just my imagination. But then one night, as I was brushing my teeth, I saw something in the mirror. Not my reflection, but a faint figure standing in the corner of the room, right behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I tried to forget about it. Overwork, stress, lack of sleep all could explain a hallucination. But then it happened again and again, always in the evening, always a faint figure in the corner of the mirror. Each time, it seemed a little clearer. After 2 weeks, I realized it was the image of a woman. Long black hair, a pale face with deep-set eyes. She wore a long white dress, a style that seemed to be from the previous century. She didn't do anything, just stood there and watched. I started avoiding the upstairs bathroom. I used the small downstairs bathroom. Although it was cramped and less convenient, I couldn't avoid it forever. One night, when the downstairs faucet was clogged, I was forced to return to the upstairs bathroom. I stepped in, my heart pounding. The mirror was still there, silent and harmless under the ceiling light. I tried not to look at it as I washed my face. But when I looked up, I saw her. This time, she wasn't standing in the corner. She was standing right behind me, so close I could feel a chilling cold emanating from her. I froze. In the mirror, I saw her slowly raise a pale hand and place it on my shoulder. But I felt nothing. No pressure, no actual touch, just a biting cold seeping through my clothes. Her mouth moved as if she was speaking, but no sound came out. I was so terrified I couldn't move or scream. Then she raised her hand and pointed to the bathtub. Somehow, I knew what she wanted me to do. With trembling legs, I walked to the bathtub and lifted the wooden panel covering it. Beneath was an antique copper tub, but there was something strange about it. I bent down and realized that at the bottom of the tub, a large section of the tiles had peeled off, revealing the wood beneath. Somehow, I don't know why, but I started gently tapping on that wooden surface. A hollow sound indicated a void underneath. I found a small tool and pried up the wooden section. Beneath was a small cavity, and inside it was an old, crumbling diary. Its leather cover was cracked with age. I opened it and began to read. It was the diary of a woman named Alina who lived in the early 20th century. The last pages recounted how her husband, a man named Richard, suspected her of infidelity and became violent. The very last line was written in hurried script. "He knows. He's coming up here. I don't have time." I shivered, put the diary down, and turned back to the mirror. The woman, Alina, was still there, but her face was now streaked with tears. She pointed again, this time to the floor near the bathtub. I knelt down and began to examine the floorboards. One board seemed looser than the others. I pried it up and discovered a small space beneath, containing a simple silver wedding ring and a lock of hair tied with a ribbon. The next day, I went to the local library and searched for information about the house and its previous owners. In an old newspaper from 1923, I found a small article. Local woman missing. Alina Watson, 27, reported missing after failing to visit her mother as promised. Her husband, Richard Watson, stated she had left the house after an argument and had not returned. I handed the diary, the ring, and the lock of hair to the police. They searched the house and discovered the skeletal remains of a woman buried beneath the floorboards of the upstairs bathroom, directly under the bathtub. I moved out shortly after that, but before leaving, I went into the upstairs bathroom one last time. In the mirror, Alina stood there, but this time she was smiling. And then slowly, her image faded until only my reflection remained. That was Oliver Heathrow's story. According to my research, the remains of a woman were indeed exhumed from an old house in the area Oliver described. DNA confirmed it was Alina Watson, who went missing in 1923. Sometimes, the departed cannot speak to us directly, but they find other ways to tell their stories. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're listening to Late Night Radio Stories. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from an email by Sophia Lindstrom, a young writer living in a city apartment building. She contacted me 3 months ago. The tone of her email was both bewildered and exhausted from lack of sleep. Listen to Sophia's experience. I moved into this apartment complex 6 months ago after breaking up with my long-term boyfriend. It's on the 17th floor, great view, affordable rent, and most importantly, quiet. Or so I thought. It all started on a rainy October night. I was writing late, trying to meet a deadline for my new novel. The clock struck 3:00 a.m. when I heard a knock at the door. 3 soft, even knocks as if someone was tapping with their knuckles on wood. I jumped, startled. Who would visit at this hour? I looked through the peephole but saw no one. The hallway was empty and silent. I must have imagined it, I told myself. The next night at the same time, the knocking sounded again. This time I was sure I wasn't mistaken. 3 even, gentle knocks. I called out, "Who's there?" No answer. I mustered up my courage, grabbed a kitchen knife, and opened the door. No one. The hallway was as empty as the night before. I started to feel uneasy. Maybe it was a noise from the next apartment. But according to the building manager, the apartment next door had been vacant for 2 months, awaiting a new tenant. On the 3rd night, I decided to ignore the knocking. 3:00 a.m., just as expected, 3 knocks sounded. I deliberately didn't react, continuing to type. But then the knocking sounded again, this time louder and then again so forcefully that the door vibrated. I called building security. The officer came up, checked the hallway, and even went into the next apartment to see if anyone had broken in. Nothing unusual. "It's probably the pipes," he said. Old buildings often have strange noises, but I knew it wasn't the pipes. The knocking was too deliberate. I started avoiding being home at 3:00 a.m. I went to a nearby 24/7 cafe or drove around until 4:00 a.m. before returning. But I couldn't live like that forever. So one night, I decided to confront my fear. I set up a small camera facing the door, recording everything from 2:30 a.m. to 3:30 a.m. Then I left for my usual cafe. The next morning, with trembling hands, I reviewed the video. 2:45 nothing, 3:00 a.m. still quiet. At 3:15 my heart almost stopped. A faint, dark shadow appeared in front of the door. Not a person, but something like smoke coalescing into a human shape. It stood there for a few seconds, then raised something like an arm and knocked on the door. I heard the knocks clearly in the video, 3 even knocks. Then it waited, as if listening. After a minute, it knocked again, this time harder. Then it waited a little longer before dissipating into thin air. I showed the video to a friend who works in technology. He checked it and confirmed there were no signs of tampering. "It could be a light reflection," he said, but his voice was unsure. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move out immediately. My lease still had 6 months left, so I started researching the building's history. After many nights searching online and at the local library, I discovered something frightening. 10 years ago, in the apartment next door, a man named James Miller had died. He lived alone, working the night shift at a local hospital. One morning, he didn't show up for work. 3 days later, when the police broke into his apartment, they found he had died of a heart attack. The horrifying thing was, according to the report, he had tried to knock on the adjacent apartment door for help. But at that time, my current apartment was vacant. No one heard his cries for help. He died at 3:00 a.m. on the day he passed. It was October 17th, the first day I heard the knocking. Last week, I decided to do something that was probably insane. At 3:00 a.m., when the knocking sounded, I didn't hide anymore. I walked to the door and said, "I know you needed help. I'm sorry no one was here when you needed them, but it's too late now. You can rest in peace." The knocking stopped. There was a moment of silence that seemed to stretch endlessly. Then I felt a cold draft blow through the crack in the door, as if someone sighed. And then I heard light footsteps walking away. The next night I waited, but there was no knocking. Nor the night after, nor the night after that. 2 weeks have passed since then. The knocking is gone. But sometimes when I work late, I still feel like someone is standing outside my door, listening. Not in a scary way, but like a friendly neighbor keeping watch. I will still move out when my lease ends, but not out of fear anymore. Sometimes I think maybe James Miller just needed someone to acknowledge what happened to him. To know that, even though it was too late, someone heard his call. That was Sophia's story. I checked and confirmed that indeed a man named James Miller died of a heart attack in that building 10 years ago, exactly as she described. I often wonder about the knocks we ignore in our daily lives. How many of them are actually cries for help? And how many souls are still lingering, just waiting to be heard by someone? This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this short musical interlude. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a live call I received a few months ago from a man named Victor Quinn. He's a professional antique collector who has spent nearly 30 years in the business. Through his deep voice, I could sense his bewilderment and a hint of fear as he shared this story. "I've been collecting antiques for 28 years, Morgan. I've seen all sorts of strange things in this profession, from antique dolls with real human hair to pendulum clocks that never seem to need winding. But nothing has chilled me quite like that photograph. I found it at an estate liquidation auction on the outskirts of the city 2 months ago. The owner was an elderly woman who had passed away at 96, with no heirs. Her belongings were auctioned off to pay her remaining debts. Most were just ordinary items: old furniture, porcelain, a few pieces of silver jewelry of little value. But in a box of old photographs, I found a family portrait taken in the 1920s. The silver frame was exquisite, and the photo quality was still excellent. But what truly drew me in wasn't the frame or the quality, but its content. The photo showed a family of 5. A father, a mother, 2 teenage boys, and a girl about 7 or 8 years old. They stood in front of a 2-story wooden house, dressed formally in 1920s style. The father in a suit, the mother in a long dress. The boys in white shirts and the little girl in a dress with a bow. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, but when I looked closer, I realized there was something not quite right about the little girl. While the other four looked straight into the camera with faint smiles, the girl was looking to the side, and there was a strange blurriness around her, as if she were slightly transparent. I bid on the photo and brought it home, adding it to my collection. I had it reframed and hung it on my office wall where I display my favorite antiques. That night, I dreamed of the little girl in the photograph. In my dream, she stood at the end of my hallway, still in her white dress with a bow, looking at me with sad eyes. As I approached, she turned away and vanished into the darkness. I woke up, my heart pounding. The next morning, when I checked the photo, I noticed a subtle change. The little girl was no longer looking to the side. Now, she was looking straight into the camera, just like the rest of the family. I told myself that perhaps I had misremembered the direction of her gaze. Maybe the light hitting the photo was different in the morning, but I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. A few days later, I started researching the house in the photograph. Thanks to a few distinctive architectural details, I identified it as being in a small town about 50 miles from the city. I decided to drive there that weekend. To my surprise, the house was still there, though significantly renovated. It was now a small guest house run by a middle-aged couple. When I showed them the photo, they immediately recognized their house. "This is the Patterson family," the wife said. "They lived here from the 1920s to the late 1940s. We know because when we bought the house, the seller provided us with its complete history." "Who are these people in the photo?" I asked, pointing to each person. "This is Thomas and Margaret Patterson," the husband explained, pointing to the couple. "And these are their two sons, Robert and James." "And the little girl?" I asked, my voice a little shaky. The couple looked at each other with confusion. "Which little girl?" the wife asked. Looking back at the photo, I pointed to the girl in the picture. They squinted, then shook their heads. "The Patterson family only had two sons," the husband said, "no daughters." I thought they were playing a trick on me, but when I looked back at the photo in my hand, I was stunned to realize the little girl had vanished. There were only 4 people left in the photo, the parents and their 2 sons. The spot where the little girl had stood was now just an empty space. Confused, I continued to research the Patterson family. I visited the local library, which archived old newspapers and documents about the town. And there, I found an article from May 1926 titled "Tragedy at the Patterson Family." It spoke of an 8-year-old daughter who died of scarlet fever. The article recounted the death of Emily Patterson, Thomas and Margaret's only daughter, from scarlet fever. Accompanying the article was a photo of Emily, the very same little girl in the family portrait I had. But what sent a chill down my spine was the date. Emily died in February 1926. But according to the inscription on the back of the family photo I possessed, it was taken in June 1926, 4 months after Emily's death. When I returned home, I pulled out the photo again. Now, the little girl Emily had returned to the photo, but her position had changed. She no longer stood in line with her family. Emily now stood slightly separated on the edge of the frame, and she no longer looked at the camera. Instead, she looked directly at me with a faint smile on her lips. That night, I dreamed of Emily again. This time, she stood by my bed, still in her white dress with a bow. "Don't forget me," she whispered. "They forgot me, but you must not." When I woke up, I decided to return the photo to the house. Perhaps that's where Emily wanted to be. I drove to the town and met the couple who owned the guest house again. "I want to give this photo back to the house," I said. "I think it belongs here." They took the photo with gratitude. "Thank you, sir," the wife said. "We'll hang it in the foyer." As I left, I glanced back at the photo one last time. Emily had returned to her original position, standing in line with her family, looking straight into the camera. But this time, there was a genuine smile on her face. I no longer dreamed of Emily. But sometimes when I work with other antiques, I still feel as if a child's gaze is watching me. Not in a spooky way, but as a gentle reminder that behind every antique is a story, a soul wanting to be remembered. That was Victor Quinn's story. After he shared it with me, I contacted the guest house he described. They confirmed that the Patterson family photo is now hung in the foyer, and indeed, the little girl Emily is present in it, with a faint smile on her lips. Some souls cannot rest because they fear being forgotten. And sometimes, an old photograph is the only way they can remind the world, I was here once. I was once a part of this family, and I deserve to be remembered. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short musical interlude. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a handwritten letter by Benjamin Clark, a night shift security guard at an office building in the city center. His handwriting was neat and orderly, reflecting the character of a disciplined and responsible man. However, through those lines, I could still sense the bewilderment and anxiety he didn't voice. I've been working as a night security guard at Westbrook Plaza, a 25-story office tower in the city center, for 6 years. My shift is from 10:00 p.m. to 6:00 a.m., 6 days a week. The job is quite monotonous, patrolling the floors, checking doors, monitoring security cameras, and handling minor incidents if any. Westbrook Plaza is not an old building. It was only built about 15 years ago. But even for a new building, I always felt there was something strange about it, especially on rainy nights. Things started about 8 months ago. It was a torrential rainy night, the wind blowing so hard it created whistling sounds through the window cracks. I was sitting in the security room, monitoring the camera screens, when I noticed a movement in the corner of the screen displaying the street outside the building. It was a man walking along the sidewalk in front of the building. The strange thing was, even though it was pouring rain, he wasn't carrying an umbrella or wearing a raincoat. He was just wearing a gray suit, head bowed, hands in his pockets, walking slowly as if deep in thought. At first, I didn't think much of it. Big cities always have their odd characters. Maybe he had just left a late meeting or simply didn't care about getting wet. I continued my work, but the next night, also around 2:17 a.m., the man appeared again. Still the same gray suit, still the same slow gait, head bowed. This time it wasn't raining, but there was another strange thing. He cast no shadow under the streetlights. I frowned, thinking it might be due to the camera angle or the lighting. I decided to go down and check. When I reached the main door of the building, the man had already disappeared. I looked in the direction he had vanished, but the street was empty, not a soul in sight. The next night and the night after, the same scene repeated itself. Exactly at 2:17 a.m., the man in the gray suit would appear, walk slowly along the sidewalk, then disappear around the corner. Never earlier, never later, always precisely at 2:17. After 2 weeks, I started to notice another detail. The man always followed the same trajectory, walking in the exact same way, as if it were a video clip playing on repeat. I began to feel a chill. I didn't dare share this with anyone. My colleagues would think I was losing my mind, and my boss might think I wasn't alert enough to work at night. So, I kept it to myself and continued to observe the mysterious man passing by every night. One night, I decided to investigate further. I reviewed the surveillance footage from the days before I noticed his presence. And indeed, the man had appeared every night at exactly 2:17, at least for the 3 months that the system stored video footage. I started searching for information about the building and the surrounding area. It took many nights digging through old newspaper articles and online documents. But finally, I found a clue. Before Westbrook Plaza was built, this site was home to an old building, the Merchant Building, built in the 1950s. The old building was destroyed in a major fire in 2005, killing 3 people. One of them was Charles Westbrook, who had planned to build the new building before the accident. In the article about the fire, there was a photo of Charles Westbrook, and my heart nearly stopped when I saw it. It was the man in the gray suit I saw every night. The article also reported that the fire started at 2:17 a.m. when most security and maintenance staff had gone home, leaving only Charles Westbrook working late. Now, every night as 2:17 approaches, I feel a strange anxiety. Not out of fear, but a peculiar sadness. Is Charles Westbrook still walking the path he took on that fateful night? Or is this just the overactive imagination of a lonely night guard? Last week, I did something I hadn't dared to do before. I went outside and stood on the sidewalk, waiting for him to arrive. At exactly 2:17, Charles Westbrook appeared, walking slowly towards me. He didn't look up, his head still bowed as always. As he passed me, I felt a chilling cold. Not the cold of the weather, but an emptiness. As if, in that moment, all warmth had been sucked out of the surrounding air. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. Charles continued to walk, not slowing down or seeming to notice my presence. When he disappeared around the corner, I let out a sigh of relief. That night, returning home after my shift, I researched Charles Westbrook further. It turned out he was a talented architect who had designed many famous buildings in the city. Westbrook Plaza was his last project, a dream he never saw completed. Charles's son, who took over the project after his father's death, named the building Westbrook Plaza in his memory. However, from what I read, the relationship between father and son was not very good. Articles mentioned disagreements about the design, about Charles wanting the building to be an architectural masterpiece, while his son wanted to maximize profits. The building was ultimately built according to the son's designer modern office tower, but lacking the distinctive character Charles had dreamed of. I wonder if that's why Charles still walks around the building every night, a building that should have been his life's work, a soul unable to rest because of an unfinished dream. Since that night, I've started keeping a sketch of the building based on Charles's original design on my desk. Every time, 2:17 a.m. comes, I look out the window and nod to Charles as a way of acknowledging that I know about his dream. I don't know if it's my imagination, but lately, when Charles passes the building, sometimes he lifts his head slightly, as if looking up at his building. And in those rare moments, I almost imagine seeing a faint smile on his face. That was Benjamin Clark's story. Indeed, there was a fire in 2005 at the site that is now Westbrook Plaza, and an architect named Charles Westbrook died in that fire. Perhaps not all souls are trapped by fear or pain. Sometimes they are held back by unfinished dreams, unfulfilled ambitions, and the desire to see their life's work come to fruition. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short musical interlude. Hello, dear listeners, Morgan Hayes here. Thank you for staying with Late Night Radio Stories. The next story comes from an email by Isabel Nguyen, a customer support representative at a large telecommunications company. She contacted me just 2 weeks ago with an experience she still can't explain. I've been working at the Horizon Telecommunications Technical Support Call Center for 3 years. My job is quite simple: answer calls from customers, resolve issues with phone, internet, or cable TV services. Most calls follow a familiar script. A customer has a problem, I guide them through troubleshooting, and then end the call. But a month ago, I received an unusual call. It was a Friday night, my shift from 8:00 p.m. to 4:00 a.m. Around 2:30 a.m., the phone rang. I answered with my usual greeting: "Hello, Horizon Technical Support. This is Isabel. How can I help you?" The other end was silent for a moment, then a man's voice spoke. His voice sounded distant, as if speaking through a poor-quality line with a lot of static in the background. "Hello, I need help. I can't make outbound calls. I need to call my daughter. She needs to know what happened." I started the usual procedure, asking for his name and account number. He gave his name as Martin Reynolds and read a series of numbers he said was his account number. When I entered the number into the system, no results appeared. I asked him to confirm, and he read the same series of numbers, still no results. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds," I said, "but this account number is not in our system. Can you tell me the phone number that's having issues?" 550-5956-78-34, he read. "I've been trying to call out all night, but I just hear static. I need to call my daughter. She needs to know what happened." I noticed the phone number he provided only had 7 digits, missing an area code. This was quite strange because since the 1990s, all phone numbers in the US have required an area code. "Mr. Reynolds," I explained, "I need the area code for that phone number." "Area code?" he asked back, sounding confused. "Oh, I'm not sure. We don't have area codes here. This is Millfield. There's only one central exchange." Millfield is a small town about 30 miles from my city. I know the place well because I grew up there before moving to the big city. And Mr. Reynolds was right. Millfield used to have only one central exchange, so residents didn't need an area code for local calls. But that changed at least 20 years ago. "Sir," I said, feeling a little annoyed. "Nowadays, all calls require an area code, even in Millfield. If you don't know your area code, I can look it up based on your address. My address is 47 Pine Street, he said, the blue house with the white picket fence across from the park. I knew Pine Street. In fact, I used to live on Maple Street, just 2 blocks away, but I didn't remember any blue house across from the park. I entered the address into the system, but still couldn't find any matching account. At this point, I started to think this was probably someone's prank, but Mr. Reynolds' voice sounded too sincere, too worried to be a joke. Mr. Reynolds, I can't find any account with the information you've provided. Are you sure you're calling the right telecommunications company? We are Horizon Communications. Again, a long silence, then he spoke, sounding confused. Horizon? No, I'm trying to reach Bell Telephone. I dialed 0 for the operator, but I got connected here instead. Bell Telephone, that company went out of business in the 1980s when AT&T was broken up. A cold chill ran down my spine. I looked at the incoming call number displayed on the screen. Unknown number. Mr. Reynolds, I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, can you tell me what today's date is? November 15th, he replied. What year, sir? Another pause. 1976. Why do you ask? My heart was pounding. 1976, nearly 50 years ago. No reason, sir, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. You said you needed to contact your daughter. What happened? He sighed heavily. There was an accident. I was driving home from my night shift at the factory. It was raining very heavily and I didn't see the truck. It hit the driver's side. I need to tell Susan, my daughter, that I won't be able to make it to her graduation this weekend. I promised her. His voice sounded pained, and I felt a deep sadness well up inside me. Mr. Reynolds, I said softly, where are you right now? I'm not sure, he said, his voice bewildered. I'm in a phone booth. After the accident, I felt a little dizzy, so I stopped to make a call. But now I can't get out, the phone booth door won't open, and outside it's very dark. Can you see the phone booth, Isabel? I asked. Nothing, he said, his voice filled with fear. Only darkness. I don't understand what's happening. I just want to talk to Susan. I didn't know what to do. Clearly, this wasn't a normal technical support call, but I couldn't just hang up either. Mr. Reynolds, I said, perhaps I can help you contact Susan. Do you know where she lives now? She lives with her mother at 20 Pine Street, Elm Road. We divorced 2 years ago. Can you tell her I'm very sorry I couldn't keep my promise, and that I'm very proud of her? Yes, I'll try to deliver your message, I promised. Thank you, he said, his voice more relieved. Oh my, it's so cold, and I feel so tired. Then suddenly his voice became anxious. Someone's out there. I can see someone approaching the phone booth. They're waving to me. Mr. Reynolds, I called, feeling equally anxious. I think I have to go, he said, his voice suddenly strangely calm. They're waiting for me. Thank you for listening, and please remember to tell Susan. The call abruptly disconnected. I sat there, holding the receiver, my heart pounding in my chest. The following week, during a visit home to Millfield, I stopped by the local library to do some research. In old newspapers from November 1976, I found a small article about a car accident on Highway 27 that killed a 42-year-old man named Martin Reynolds. The accident occurred on the night of November 15th, and Mr. Reynolds was found in his severely damaged car the next morning. The article mentioned he left an 18-year-old daughter named Susan. With a pounding heart, I continued searching and discovered a striking detail. Near the accident site, there was a public phone booth. But according to the police report, there was no evidence Mr. Reynolds had left his car after the accident. I managed to contact Susan Reynolds, now Susan Hartley, a 60-year-old woman still living in Millfield. I didn't tell her about the strange call, only that I was researching local history and wanted to know more about her father. Susan told me her father had promised to attend her high school graduation on November 20, 1976. He had worked hard to buy her a camera as a graduation gift. When he died in the accident, the camera was found in the trunk of his car, carefully wrapped. The thing that hurt me the most, Susan said, is that I never got to hear my father say he was proud of me. We had a complicated relationship after my parents divorced, but deep down, I always hoped he was proud of me. I didn't say anything about the call. How could I explain it? But before leaving, I told her, I'm sure your father was very proud of you, and he was very sorry he couldn't keep his promise." Susan looked at me with tear-filled eyes and said, "Thank you." "I don't know why," she added, "but hearing you say that, I feel like a burden has been lifted after many years." I never received another call from Martin Reynolds. But sometimes when I work the night shift and answer the phone in the late hours, I wonder how many other voices are trying to communicate from somewhere between this world and the next, just to deliver one last message. That was Isabel Nguyen's story. From a few sources that can be considered legitimate, I can confirm there was indeed a car accident on November 15, 1976, that killed a man named Martin Reynolds. The line between this world and the next is thinner than we think. And sometimes, modern technology meets lonely souls. Strange calls can connect us with the departed, those who still have something to say. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us, we'll be right back after the short break. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a voicemail left on the show's hotline 2 months ago. The trembling yet determined voice belonged to Emma Whitaker, a 28-year-old preschool teacher working at a suburban school. Listen to the story Emma wanted to share. "I've been a preschool teacher at Oakwood Elementary School for 4 years. I've always loved my job. Nothing makes me happier than seeing the radiant faces of children when they learn something new. Oakwood School is an old school, built in the 1950s. Last year, the school decided to build a new playground area to accommodate the increasing number of students. To do this, they had to demolish an old playground area located behind the school, a place that hadn't been used for many years. The old playground looked quite eerie. Rusty swings creaked in the wind, an ancient metal slide with cracks, and a sand pit overgrown with weeds. No one remembered why this playground was abandoned. Although there were rumors that an accident happened there in the 1970s, no one knew exactly what happened, and most people dismissed it as nonsense. I usually took my students to the main playground in front of the school. But one day, while we were playing catch, the ball flew over the fence and rolled towards the old playground. I told the children to stay put and went to retrieve the ball. As I stepped into the old playground, I felt a distinct change in the atmosphere. Even though it was a warm May day, it was strangely cold here. I bent down to pick up the ball, and as I stood up, I caught a glimpse of a little boy sitting on a swing. My heart pounded. I was sure no one was there when I entered. The boy had messy brown hair, wearing a striped shirt and shorts, a style from the 1970s. He was gently swaying, his head bowed. "Hello," I called, thinking perhaps it was a student who had sneaked into the forbidden area. "You're not allowed here. This isn't a safe area." The boy didn't look up. I moved closer, and when I was about 10 feet from him, he looked up at me. My heart almost stopped. His face was pale, with deep, sad eyes, but what frightened me wasn't his sadness, but the injury on his head. A large gash ran from his temple to the back of his head. I took a deep breath, intending to ask if he needed help, but when I opened my mouth, the boy vanished, leaving only the empty swing gently swaying in the wind. I quickly returned to my students, trying not to show my fear. Throughout the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about the boy with the head injury. That afternoon, I went to the principal's office, Mrs. Jenkins, who had worked at Oakwood for nearly 30 years. I decided not to mention the ghost boy, only asking about the history of the old playground. "Oh, that's a sad story," Mrs. Jenkins sighed. "In 1974, a 7-year-old boy named Michael Cooper had an accident there. He climbed to the top of the slide, slipped, and fell. His head hit the metal edge of the slide. He died on the way to the hospital." I felt a chill down my spine. "And they closed the playground after that?" "Not immediately," Mrs. Jenkins explained, "but after the accident, many teachers and students reported strange things. Children's laughter when no one was there, swings swaying on their own, and some children said they saw a sad little boy playing alone. Finally, in 1986, the playground was closed and a new one was built in front of the school." Mrs. Jenkins looked at me intently. "Why do you ask, dear? Did you see something there?" I shook my head, not wanting to admit it. "Just curious. I heard some students talking about it." For the next 2 weeks, I stayed away from the old playground, though sometimes I felt a strange urge to return there. Then one day, when I was alone in the classroom during lunch break, I heard a gentle tap on the window. I turned around and saw the boy, Michael, standing outside looking in. He no longer looked sad, but was smiling and waving at me. There was no longer any wound on his head. I stood there, frozen with both fear and curiosity. Michael pointed towards the old playground as if inviting me out there. I don't know what prompted me, but I nodded. The boy flashed a radiant smile and vanished. After classes ended that day, I went to the old playground. By then, workers had already begun to dismantle it to prepare for the new construction. The slide had been removed, leaving only the swings and the sandpit. As I stepped in, I felt that cold air again. But this time it wasn't scary. It was like a cool, pleasant sensation on a hot summer day. Michael didn't appear, but as I approached the sandpit, I noticed something sparkling in the sunlight. I bent down and dug up a small string of beads with a silver heart pendant. I opened the heart and saw inside a tiny photo of a young woman holding a little boy. On the back of the pendant, engraved words read, "To Michael, Mom's darling, forever in my heart." I held the pendant, feeling tears well up. Somehow, I understood that this was why Michael was still here. He had lost his mother's gift on the day of the accident and couldn't leave without it. I spent the evening searching for information about the Cooper family and finally found an old newspaper article about the accident. Michael's mother, Sarah Cooper, had moved out of town after her son's death, too heartbroken to stay. But according to information I found online, she was still alive, 76 years old, living in a city about a 2-hour drive away. That weekend, I drove to visit Sarah Cooper. I was so nervous how could I explain how I came to possess her son's pendant after nearly 50 years. But when I met Sarah, a petite woman with white hair and gentle eyes, I told a simpler version of the truth, that I was a teacher at Oakwood School and the pendant had been found during the demolition of the old playground. When I handed her the pendant, Sarah took it with trembling hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. I gave it to Michael on his 7th birthday, just 2 months before, her voice caught. He wore it every day, but it was lost in the accident. We never found it. She opened the heart and looked at the tiny photo inside, smiling through her tears. "Thank you so much for bringing it to me. You don't know how much this means." As I was about to leave, Sarah took my hand. "You know," she said, "for years I've dreamed of Michael. And in those dreams, he always said he had lost something and couldn't find it. I never understood what those dreams meant, until now." I returned home with a strange sense of relief. And when school reopened on Monday, I went to the old playground, now completely demolished, just an empty patch of land. That cold feeling was gone. No more Michael sitting on the swing, no more feeling of being watched, just a gentle breeze blowing through, carrying the happy laughter from the front playground, where my students were playing. As I returned to my classroom, I heard children's laughter echoing behind me. But when I turned around, I only saw a single leaf caught in the wind, soaring high and disappearing from sight. That was Emma Whittaker's story. Indeed, in 1974, a 7-year-old boy named Michael Cooper died in an accident at the Oakwood Elementary School playground. Some souls are held back not by fear or hatred, but by love. Love for a lost loved one or for a precious lost memento. And sometimes, all they need to rest in peace is someone brave enough to listen, kind enough to help. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still watching Late Night Radio Stories. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back in a moment. Welcome back to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a long letter by Alex Mercer, a sophomore architecture student. He wrote to me with hurried handwriting, as if wanting to unburden himself of the story as quickly as possible. Listen to Alex's experience. I moved into the Riverside boarding house at the beginning of last fall semester. It was an old 3-story building, about a 15-minute walk from the university. Not luxurious, but the rent was cheap, and I had a small studio apartment all to myself, a significant upgrade from the noisy dorms where I lived my freshman year. My apartment was on the 2nd floor, at the end of the hallway. To the right was a young couple, always busy with work and rarely home. To the left was apartment 2B, the residence of a neighbor I later learned was Mr. Howard Reed. I met Mr. Reed on my first day moving in. As I struggled with boxes, the door to apartment 2B creaked open and an elderly man peered out. He was tall and thin, with neatly combed silver hair and shrewd blue eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "New student?" he asked, his voice warm but with a hint of reserve. "Yes, sir," I nodded. Alex Mercer, I'm an architecture sophomore. Howard Reed, he introduced himself, not stepping out of his apartment. I've lived here for almost 30 years. If you need any help, just knock. For the first few weeks, I rarely saw Mr. Reed. Sometimes I heard classical radio playing from his apartment or the scent of cooked food. Occasionally, we'd bump into each other in the hallway and exchange polite greetings. I learned he was a retired math professor, living alone after his wife passed away 10 years ago. However, there was one peculiar thing I noticed. Mr. Reed always seemed to know what I was doing. One time I stayed up late to finish a design assignment, and the next morning he asked me, "That assignment was difficult, wasn't it? You were up until almost 3 a.m. Another time, after I had an argument on the phone with my ex-girlfriend, Mr. Reed met me in the hallway and said, "Romantic matters are sometimes very complicated. Don't be too sad. Everything will be all right." Initially, I thought it was just coincidence. Maybe he overheard me talking through the walls. This old building wasn't very soundproof. But gradually, I started to feel uneasy. It seemed Mr. Reed knew too much about my schedule, my habits, and even my private conversations. I started paying more attention and realized that sometimes when I walked past his apartment, I could see a small gap in the door, as if he was watching me through it. A few times, I felt like someone was watching me while I was studying in my apartment. I would turn around suddenly and catch a glimpse of a shadow flitting past my window, even though my apartment was on the second floor and had no balcony. One evening, I returned late after a group study session at the library. As I passed Mr. Reed's apartment, I heard him talking to someone. His voice was soft but clear through the thin door. "He's a diligent student, Margaret, isn't he? He reminds me of myself when I was young." I stopped, curious. Mr. Reed was on the phone, but then I heard him continue. "No, I don't think he knows. How could he know? No one knows. That's why we have to be careful." A cold chill ran down my spine. I hurried into my apartment and locked the door. The next day, I met Mrs. Hernandez, the building manager, and asked her about Mr. Reed. "Oh, Howard is a wonderful tenant," she said. "Always pays rent on time, never causes trouble. A real gentleman. His wife, Margaret, died in a car accident quite a while ago. It was heartbreaking. They were a lovely couple. He never remarried and rarely has visitors." Mrs. Hernandez paused as if considering something, then added, "But he's an observer, always knows everything that goes on in the building. Sometimes I think he knows even more than I do." That didn't make me feel any better. When I returned to my apartment, I noticed the door to apartment 2B was slightly ajar. Without thinking too much, I approached and knocked gently. "Mr. Reed, are you there?" No answer. The door opened a little wider under my knock. I knew I shouldn't, but curiosity won. I peeked inside. The apartment was dark and quiet, with antique furniture, books piled on shelves, and an old radio on a table. There was a strange scent, a mix of old books, women's perfume, and something I couldn't identify. "Mr. Reed?" I called again, my voice softer. I was about to retreat when my eyes caught something on the living room wall. Photographs. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of photographs pinned to the wall, forming a giant mosaic. I stepped closer and my heart almost stopped. They were pictures of me. Me walking to school, me sitting in a cafe, me at the library, me talking to friends, me entering the building with boxes on my first day. All taken from a distance, as if by a stealthy paparazzi. But what was even more frightening were the other pictures. Pictures taken of me through my apartment window. Me sleeping, me studying, me changing clothes, me in the bathroom. How? I recoiled in horror, and then I realized there were pictures of other people on the wall too. Other young students, both male and female, from over the years, judging by their hairstyles and fashion styles. All taken in the same apartment. I was in apartment 2C, my apartment. Heart pounding, I continued to look around and discovered a small, half-open door in the corner of the room. Inside was a dark room with a small table laden with surveillance equipment, binoculars, zoom cameras, and a monitor displaying the inside of my apartment from somewhere on the ceiling. I rushed out of Mr. Reed's apartment, ran into my own, and locked the door. I looked up at the ceiling, trying to find a camera or a peephole, but saw nothing. I called the police immediately. They arrived within 20 minutes, searched Mr. Reed's apartment, which was now empty, with no sign of him or any photos on the wall, no observation room, no surveillance equipment, just a normal apartment belonging to a normal old man. No one believed me. Even Mrs. Hernandez said Mr. Reed had gone to visit his daughter in Florida for a few days and that I had probably imagined everything due to stress from my studies. I knew what I had seen. I moved out the very next day, leaving most of my belongings and losing my security deposit. I didn't care. I just wanted to get out of there. A few weeks later, I bumped into a freshman student looking for a boarding house. He mentioned that he had found a cheap apartment in the Riverside area. Apartment 2C, he said excitedly. A nice old man lives next door and said he'd keep an eye on me. Isn't that great? I tried to warn him. I really did try, but he just laughed and said, I'm being paranoid. Sometimes I still dream about those pictures, my most private moments recorded by a complete stranger. And I wonder who was Howard Reed really? And how many other Howard Reeds are out there, silently watching us every day without our knowledge. That was Alex Mercer's story. After receiving this letter, I contacted the local police to learn more about the incident. According to them, there were no official reports of a man named Howard Reed at the address Alex provided. However, they confirmed that there had been several complaints of stalking at that building over the past few years, but not enough evidence to initiate an investigation. When I contacted the building management company, they stated that apartments 2B and 2C had been continuously rented for many years, with an unusually high tenant turnover rate for apartment 2C. Perhaps the most terrifying thing is not demons or spirits, but humans themselves. Those who silently watch, record, and invade our private spaces without our knowledge. And what's even more frightening is how we often ignore the warning signs until it's too late. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. We'll be back after a short break. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a live call to the show 3 months ago. The caller was Julian Blackwood, a 35-year-old musician living in a small house near the coast. His deep voice held a profound sadness as he shared the following story. I moved into the house on the cliff 2 years ago after my last album failed miserably and my record label canceled my contract. I needed a quiet place to think, to find inspiration again. And Cliff Haven Manor, as it was called, seemed like the perfect place. It was a small, 2-story stone house built in the 1920s, perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. About 10 miles from the nearest town, no neighbors, just the sea, the sky, and the ceaseless winds blowing from the ocean. The former owner, an elderly woman named Evelyn, had lived there for nearly 40 years before moving into a nursing home. When I met her to finalize the purchase of the house, she told me, "This house has its own music. Listen to it, and it will teach you songs you've never known." At the time, I thought those were just the metaphorical words of a romantic old woman. But after a few weeks of living there, I understood what she meant. The house had a unique architecture with tall chimneys and many small crevices in the walls, designed to withstand the strong winds that frequently swept through the area. When the wind blew through these crevices, it created strange sounds like breathing, whispering, and sometimes, on strong windy nights, like someone singing faintly in the distance. Initially, these sounds bothered me. I couldn't concentrate on composing, but gradually I began to get used to them. In fact, I started to find inspiration in those natural melodies. I began writing music again, but this time not to meet record label demands, but for myself. Then one winter night, as a storm was approaching the coast, I heard something different. The wind howled around the house more fiercely than I had ever heard. But amidst the howling wind, there was a clear melody, a real song with lyrics and rhythm. A clear, sad female voice sang a song I had never heard before. I thought I was imagining it. Perhaps I was too tired or under the influence of the glass of wine I had before bed. But then I realized I was holding a pen, writing down the melodies and lyrics on a sheet of music. The song was about a woman waiting for her lover to return from the sea, gazing out at the ocean every day, hoping to see his sails. But he never returned, and she stood there waiting until her hair turned white and her body grew frail. When I finished the score, I realized I had written a complete song melody, harmony, and lyrics, and it was better than anything I had ever composed before. The next morning, after the storm had passed, I decided to learn more about the house and its previous owners. I drove to the nearest town and visited the local library. After a few hours of searching, I discovered that the house was built in 1924 by a fishing boat captain named Samuel Porter for his wife, Elizabeth. According to local newspaper articles, Samuel went missing at sea during a great storm in 1927. People said Elizabeth refused to believe her husband was dead. She continued to live in the house on the cliff, gazing out at the sea every day, waiting for Samuel to return. She lived that way for 40 years until she passed away in the house in 1967, coincidentally on a stormy night, similar to the night Samuel disappeared. And according to the locals, she often sang a sad song, a song she composed for her lost husband. It was the exact song I had heard and written down the night before. My heart pounded as I returned home. Could it be a coincidence, or had I read about this story somewhere and forgotten? Perhaps. I waited until night, and when the wind began to blow strongly, I sat in the living room with a tape recorder. I wanted proof to be sure I wasn't losing my mind. That night, the wind wasn't strong enough and I didn't hear the song. Nor the next night, nor the night after that. I began to think I had imagined it all. But then, a month later, another major storm hit the coast. The wind howled around the house, so strong I worried the old windows might break. And amidst that howling, I heard it. Elizabeth's song, this time clearer, closer, as if she were standing just outside the window. I turned on the tape recorder and listened in awe. Not only was there the old song, but there was also a new one, another I had never heard before. A song about loneliness, about waiting in vain, and about hope that never fades. I wrote it down again, my fingers trembling as I recorded the notes and lyrics. The next morning, I checked the tape recorder. There was the sound of wind, rain hitting the windows, and the creaking of the old house. But no song, no woman's voice. I should have felt disappointed, but instead, I felt a strange sense of peace. Whether or not there was a recording, I knew what I had heard. And I had the songs, beautiful compositions that I never could have created myself without Elizabeth's help. In the following months, whenever there was a big storm, I would hear Elizabeth sing, and each time I would write a new song. Sometimes I felt like she was composing just for me, teaching me how to transform sadness into beauty. After a year, I had enough songs for a complete album. I called a friend who worked at an independent record label and sent him the demos. He called me back the next day, his voice full of excitement. "Julian, these are the best songs I've ever heard from you. They are so raw, sad, but beautiful. We want to sign you immediately." I named the album Songs in the Wind and credited Elizabeth Porter as co-writer. When the record label asked about her, I simply said she was an old friend who had inspired me. The album was released last fall and received critical acclaim. Critics were particularly impressed by the sincerity and deep emotion in the songs, a big change from my previous style. The strange thing is, since the album was released, I haven't heard Elizabeth sing anymore, no matter how many storms there are. At first, I felt sad, as if I had lost a friend. But then I realized that perhaps she had achieved what she wanted. She had shared her music with the world through me, and perhaps by retelling her love story with Samuel, she had found peace. I still live in the house on the cliff, and although I no longer hear Elizabeth's song, I still feel her presence on windy nights, not as a frightening spirit, but as a friend, a mentor who taught me that the deepest sorrow can create the greatest beauty. And sometimes, standing by the window looking out at the sea, just as Elizabeth once did, I wonder if one day she and Samuel will be reunited. If not in this life, then perhaps in another world, where lovers never have to be separated. That was Julian Blackwood's story. Several sources have confirmed that the album, Songs in the Wind, indeed exists and was released last year, with Elizabeth Porter credited as co-writer. I also found records of Samuel and Elizabeth Porter, along with the story of Samuel's death at sea and Elizabeth's tireless waiting. I think music, like love, can transcend death. And sometimes the departed find ways to communicate with us, not through frightening knocks or supernatural phenomena, but through the most beautiful things they created in life. A song, a poem, a work of art, things they couldn't take with them when they left this world. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short musical interlude. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from an email I received on a rainy night last month. The sender was Rachel Thompson, a 32-year-old graphic designer. Normally, I would verify such stories before sharing them, but there was something about this one that chilled me to the bone. Listen to Rachel's story. I don't know if anyone will read this email or if it will even be sent successfully, but I need to share what's happening to me before it's too late. It all started 3 weeks ago when I received a text message on my phone from an unknown number, just a simple line. "Hello, Rachel, I miss you." At first, I thought it was someone who had sent a message to the wrong number. I didn't reply. The next day, another message came. "Rachel, we need to talk. This is important." This time I replied, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong number." A few minutes later, a new message. "No, I don't have the wrong number. I know it's you, Rachel, I always know." The strange thing was, when I tried to call the number back, an automated voice announced that the phone number didn't exist. I tried to block the number, but the messages kept coming, seemingly from different numbers each time. I remember our old apartment on Maple Street. You always loved the small flower garden on the balcony. That was the address of my old apartment, where I lived with my ex-boyfriend, Nathan, before we broke up 2 years ago. But how did the texter know that? "Do you remember how I always made coffee for you in the morning? 2 sugars, no milk, exactly the way you liked it." It was true, Nathan did do that. But after we broke up amicably, we barely stayed in touch. And this wasn't his phone number. I checked. I started to get worried, so I called Nathan. His phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, but he didn't call back. The messages continued to come, more and more each day. "I still have the photo we took in Bali. You were so beautiful in that blue dress. I never told you, but I bought a ring. I was going to propose to you on your birthday. I still don't understand why you left me, Rachel. What did I do wrong?" What chilled me was that all the details were accurate. Nathan and I did go to Bali. My birthday was indeed when our relationship started to falter. But the tone in the messages became increasingly strange, not like the Nathan I knew at all. "Sometimes I stand outside your new apartment just to make sure you're okay." That's when I truly got scared. I had never given Nathan my new address. I contacted the police, but they said they couldn't do much. The messages contained no direct threats, and they couldn't trace the origin because the phone numbers seemed to be generated randomly. I started researching Nathan. Through a mutual friend, I learned that he had moved to California to work for a tech company a year ago. That's why we lost touch. But then, a week ago, the messages suddenly changed. "I don't have much time left, Rachel. I need to see you." I'm not myself anymore, but I still remember. I still love you. Come to where we first met on Friday at 8:00 p.m. This is our last chance. Nathan and I first met at an art exhibition at Gallery Lumiere, a small gallery in the city center. That exhibition had long ended, but the gallery was still there. I knew I shouldn't go. All signs pointed to this being a dangerous situation, but I also needed to know what was happening. So, I asked a friend to come with me and stand at a safe distance, ready to call the police if there was any sign of trouble. When I arrived at Gallery Lumiere on Friday evening, it was closed, but the lights were still on inside. The security guard there told me that a man had requested a private viewing and had paid handsomely for the privilege. "He's waiting for you inside," the guard said. "He said you would come." Heart pounding, I stepped into the gallery. It was empty and quiet, only the sound of my footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Then I saw him. Nathan, standing in front of a painting at the far end of the room. It was the same painting we had stood before when we first met, a stormy seascape with a lonely lighthouse. "Nathan," I called, my voice trembling. He turned around. It was Nathan, but something was wrong. His face was pale, thinner than I remembered, and his eyes were empty, as if lifeless. "Rachel," he smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "You came." "Nathan, what's going on? Why are you sending those messages?" "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice strange and distant. "I need you to know the truth." "What truth?" "About me dying 3 months ago." My heart almost stopped. "What? This isn't funny, Nathan." "It's not a joke," he continued. "Car accident in California, I didn't survive." "No, that can't be." I shook my head, backing away. "I'm talking to you right now. You're standing right in front of me." "Not entirely," he said. "The difficult thing to explain is that I didn't want to leave. I still had unfinished business with you." He stepped towards me, and I could feel the temperature in the room drop abruptly. My breath turned into white mist in the air. "I can only stay for a short time," Nathan said. "The distance between where I am and this place is very difficult to cross. but I have to tell you that I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder for us. I'm sorry I let you go." I was speechless. A part of me wanted to run, but another part, a deeper part, knew that this was the real Nathan in some unexplainable way. "I don't have much time left," he said, his voice growing weak. "I just want you to know that I always loved you and I want you to be happy. Don't let the pain hold you back. Live, Rachel, live for both of us." Then he reached out as if to touch my face. But his hand didn't touch my skin. Instead, I felt a chilling sensation on my cheek, like winter's breath. "Goodbye, Rachel," he whispered. And before my eyes, his form became hazy, like smoke dissolving into the air. I stood there trembling, tears streaming down my cheeks. My friend rushed in, worried because she had waited too long outside. "Rachel, what's wrong? Who was in there with you?" "No one," the security guard said, looking confused. "She came in alone." "No," my friend frowned. "I saw her talking to someone. I could see the shape of a man through the window." The guard shook his head. "I assure you no one else booked a private viewing tonight. Only this young lady." When I got home, I immediately searched for news about Nathan online, and I found it. A small article from a local California newspaper published 3 months ago. "Local man dies in car accident on Highway 1. There was a small photo of Nathan accompanying the article. Since that night, I haven't received any more messages. My phone is silent. But sometimes when I'm almost asleep, I feel a cool breath on my cheek and the gentle sensation of a hand that can't touch my skin. I don't know if anyone will believe this story. Sometimes I wonder if it was a strange dream or if I'm experiencing some kind of mental breakdown. But deep down, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that sometimes love can transcend death, not to drag us back to the past, but to free us towards the future. That was Rachel Thompson's story. I spent a few hours searching for news about the accident she described, and indeed, found an article about the death of Nathan Reynolds in a car accident in California 3 months ago. There are moments in life when the boundary between this world and the next becomes thin. And sometimes, if love is strong enough and unspoken words weigh too heavily, a soul can find a way to return, even for a brief moment, to say a final goodbye. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still watching Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short musical interlude. Hello, dear listeners, Morgan Hayes here. Thank you for staying with Late Night Radio Stories. The next story comes from a letter by Thomas Lawson, a 42-year-old projectionist at the Old Majestic Cinema. He has worked there for 20 years, and in his letter, he shared a strange experience that happened last year. Listen to Thomas's story. The Majestic Cinema has been open since 1938, and it still retains the classic beauty of cinema's golden age. Vaulted ceilings with sparkling golden star patterns, red velvet seats, and walls adorned with Art Deco motifs. Unlike modern multiplexes, the Majestic only has 3 screening rooms, with the main room, Room 1, being the largest and oldest, retaining its original architecture from the early days. I started working at the Majestic in 2002 as a ticket seller, then advanced to projectionist. I love this job and I love this cinema, even with its quirks. One of the strange things about the Majestic is seat J13 in Room 1. This is a seat in the middle row, near the center of the theater. There's nothing special about its appearance. It's a red velvet seat just like all the others. But according to the long-standing tradition of the theater, this seat is never sold. In the ticketing system, J13 is always marked as broken or under maintenance. When I first started working here, I asked the manager, Mr. Harrison, about this. "Just don't sell that seat," he replied with a rare seriousness. "It's a tradition of the theater. That seat is for Elias." "Who is Elias?" I asked. "It's just tradition," Mr. Harrison repeated, clearly unwilling to elaborate. Years passed, and I gradually learned more about Elias from the veteran staff. According to legend, Elias Jenkins was a man who died in the theater in 1940, just 2 years after it opened. He was a regular customer, always sitting in seat J13, and one night he quietly passed away from a heart attack while watching a movie. Since then, it's said that his spirit has remained in the theater, especially in seat J13. Most staff considered this just a fun story, part of theater folklore, but there were still unwritten rules. Don't sell seat J13, and when the screening room is empty, you should respectfully nod to that seat when passing by. I followed these rules mechanically for years, not really believing in the ghost story. But that changed on the night of May 14th last year. It was a quiet Tuesday night, the theater was sparsely attended. We were showing a new horror film, but there were only about 10 people in room 1. The last screening ended at 11:30 p.m., and I stayed behind to check the screening room as per usual procedure. When all the audience had left, I entered room 1 with a flashlight. I walked along the rows of seats, checking for forgotten items or trash that needed to be cleaned. As I approached row J, I felt the temperature suddenly drop. I could see my breath in the air, even though it was a rather warm September night. I shined my flashlight towards seat J13 and froze. The seat was not empty as I expected. There was a faint figure sitting there, the form of an elderly man in a vintage suit. He wasn't looking at me, but straight at the darkened screen. My heart pounded in my chest, but I tried to remain calm. "Excuse me, sir," I spoke up, my voice trembling. "The theater is closed." No reaction. The figure remained motionless. I told myself my eyes were playing tricks on me, perhaps it was just the light and shadows creating an illusion. I moved closer, shining the flashlight directly onto the seat. The seat was empty. I let out a sigh of relief. Just my imagination, I thought. But as I turned to continue on my way, I heard a voice, a hoarse whisper, seemingly coming from seat J13 itself. "Hello, Thomas." I froze, not daring to turn around. It couldn't be real. No one else was in the theater but me. "May I speak with you for a moment?" The voice continued, softly but clearly. I rarely get a chance to talk to anyone. Slowly, I turned around. Seat J13 was still empty, but the air around it seemed thick, slightly vibrating like a heat haze. "Are you Elias?" I asked, surprised my voice was still steady. There was a slight chuckle. "So you've heard of me. Yes, I am Elias Jenkins, and you are Thomas, the projectionist." "How do you know my name?" I asked, though deep down I knew it was a foolish question. If he was truly a ghost who had been in this theater for over 80 years, he would surely know the names of all the staff. "I heard others call you Elias, yes, and I see you work here every day. You are the best projectionist the Majestic has ever had. You truly care about the films and the audience's experience." I didn't know whether to feel proud or terrified about being watched by a ghost for so many years. "Thank you," I stammered. "You don't need to be afraid," Elias said. His voice became gentler. "I am not a scary spirit. I am just a man who loved cinema, even after death." I swallowed hard and decided to follow curiosity rather than fear. I pulled a chair from row F and sat down opposite seat J13. "Why are you still here?" I asked. "It's been over 80 years. "We're better to be," Elias replied, and I could sense a smile in his voice. "I have loved this cinema since the day it opened. When I was alive, I came here every week, sometimes even every day. I had no family, no children. This was my true home." "And you died here in that seat?" "Yes, while watching the Philadelphia story," Elias confirmed. "But don't be sad, it was a wonderful way to go. I was laughing at a Cary Grant wisecrack, and after that I was here but in a different way. I felt no pain at all." I nodded, a strange feeling of empathy rising within me. "So you've just been sitting here watching movies for the past 80 years? "Mostly, yes," Elias said. "I've seen every film screened here since 1940. Seen technology change from black and white to color, from film reels to digital. Seen cinematic trends come and go. Seen audiences change their clothes, their hairstyles, the way they talk. It's fascinating." "Do you like modern films?" I asked, feeling the conversation becoming increasingly normal despite the circumstances. "Some I do, some I don't," Elias replied, sounding exactly like a discerning film critic. "I don't try to be a purist, but sometimes they rely too much on special effects and forget that a good story is the heart of a good film. But I do really like Christopher Nolan and Wes Anderson. They have their own style." I chuckled softly, unable to believe I was discussing modern directors with a ghost from the 1940s. "Elias," I said, "may I ask why you're talking to me tonight? You've been here for many years, but never." "It's because of the theater," Elias interrupted, his voice growing serious. "I hear rumors that the owners are considering selling it, that it might be torn down." My heart sank. He was right. Rumors had been circulating among the staff for the past few months, though there had been no official announcement. The Majestic was struggling to compete with modern multiplexes, and the land was very valuable. I've heard those rumors, I admitted. You must help me save it, Thomas, Elias whispered, his voice filled with urgency. This isn't just about me personally. Majestic is a part of this city's history. It has stood through wars, through the civil rights movement, through every ebb and flow. It doesn't deserve to be destroyed. But how? I asked, feeling helpless. I'm just a projectionist. I have no power to prevent the sale of the theater. But you have other things, Elias said. You have knowledge and you have love for this place. Elias told me that he knew of a hidden secret in the theater. A small, forgotten room behind the projection booth wall, where the theater's founder, Theodore Majestic, had stored original records and documents. Among them, there might be documents proving the historical value of the building, enough for it to be recognized as a historical landmark and protected from demolition. That night, under Elias' guidance, I found the secret room. It was behind an old panel in the projector room, hidden away during renovations and upgrades. In that small, dusty room, we found a treasure trove. Original blueprints, correspondence from major film stars of the 1930s and 40s, and most importantly, evidence that Majestic had played a vital role in local history, hosting important fundraising events during World War II and being one of the first cinemas in the area to break racial segregation. With these documents, I and a group of other passionate staff successfully campaigned for Majestic to be recognized as a historical landmark. The owners ultimately decided not to sell it and instead invested in its restoration, repositioning Majestic as a unique classic cinema. Since that night, I occasionally chat with Elias after work. He is a wonderful conversationalist with a deep love for cinema and a vast knowledge of its history. I have learned a lot from him, and seat J13, it is always left empty. But now, when I pass by, I don't just nod mechanically. I smile and softly say, "Hello, Elias, how was the movie today?" Sometimes, in the dim light of the theater, I almost imagine seeing a faint smile on an elderly face and a gentle wave in return. That was Thomas Lawson's story. The Majestic Cinema indeed exists and was recently recognized as a historical landmark last year, thanks to the efforts of a group of staff led by a longtime projectionist. And interestingly, as I researched the theater's history, I found a small article from September 1940 mentioning the death of a man named Elias Jenkins at a local cinema while watching the Philadelphia story. Not all lingering spirits have tragic stories or vengeful motives. Sometimes they simply stay out of love. Love for a place, an art form, or a moment in time they don't want to let go of. And sometimes they can become unexpected guardians of what they cherished, even after they're gone. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a man named Marcus Blackwell, a 52-year-old antique collector. He sent me a long handwritten letter with neat, even, slanting handwriting, recounting a special antique item he bought 2 years ago. I've been collecting antique clocks for over 25 years. My house is full of clocks, wall clocks, table clocks, grandfather clocks from many countries and different eras. My wife, Diana, has grown accustomed to the incessant ticking and the chiming of clocks every hour. She jokes, if one day all the clocks stopped working, we wouldn't be able to sleep because of the sudden silence. But of all my clocks, none compares to the grandfather clock I found at a small rural auction 2 years ago. It was a beautiful clock, nearly 8 feet tall, made of oak wood that had aged to a deep reddish-brown over time. The brass clock face had intricate Roman numerals, and the silver hands were finely carved. But what truly made it stand out were the carvings on the clock's case. Complex images of angels and demons intertwined with astronomical and astrological symbols. The seller, an old man named Lawrence, said the clock was crafted in Germany in the late 19th century by a clockmaker named Gustav Müller. According to Lawrence, Gustav was known for his meticulous work, but also had a reputation for being a bit eccentric. People rumored that he believed in magic and had incorporated protective spells into every clock he created. Gustav believed that time was a dangerous thing, Lawrence told me as I examined the clock. He said that time could be bent, stretched, and even broken if you knew how. This clock was his masterpiece, called the Zwerter, or the Timekeeper. I listened politely, thinking this was just a story to increase the item's value. I had heard all sorts of such tales over my years of collecting, but regardless of any accompanying legends, this was a truly beautiful clock, and I was determined to own it. I bid aggressively and finally won the clock for $3,200, a bargain price for such a rare item. As I paid, Lawrence grabbed my arm, his eyes suddenly serious. "There's one thing you need to know about this clock," he said, his voice lowered. "It must never stop. The pendulum must always swing." "If not, then what?" I asked, half curious, half amused. Lawrence just shook his head. "Just make sure it always runs. Wind it every week on Sunday, no sooner, no later." I nodded, thinking this was just part of the clock's strange story. When we moved the clock home, I placed it prominently in the living room. Diana complained that it looked a bit scary with its strange carvings, but she had to admit it was an impressive piece. I wound the clock and set the pendulum. Its deep, steady ticking quickly became part of the symphony from all the clocks in our house, and when it chimed each hour, its sound was also something special, not the cold, clear chime of other clocks, but a deep tone, almost like distant church bells. The first week passed normally. I wound the clock on Sunday, as Lawrence had instructed. Although I didn't truly believe his strange warnings, the clock ran perfectly, not a minute fast or slow. The second week, I started to notice something strange. Sometimes when I walked past the clock, I felt as if it was watching me. I know that sounds silly, clocks don't have eyes, but it was a feeling I couldn't shake. And there were times at night when I imagined its ticking would slow down slightly, as if it was resting, only to speed up when I approached. Diana also noticed something. "I don't like the way that clock looks at me," she said one evening. "Looks at you," I laughed. "It's a clock, Diana, it can't look." "I know it sounds crazy," she insisted, "but sometimes I feel like the carved faces on it move, as if they're changing expressions depending on their mood." I reassured my wife that it was just the changing light and shadows creating an optical illusion. She wasn't entirely convinced, but didn't bring it up again. On the third Sunday, I had to go on an unexpected business trip and forgot to wind the clock. I only remembered on Monday evening when I returned home and noticed the clock had stopped. The pendulum was motionless in its glass case. "Oh, I forgot," I mumbled and quickly wound it, restarting the pendulum. For a moment, I thought I heard a faint sigh as the pendulum began to swing again, but I dismissed it, thinking it was just the wind whistling through a window crack. That night, I dreamed of the clock. In my dream, the pendulum swung faster and faster. The hands spun backward, and the carved faces on the clock's case suddenly came alive, contorting in agony. I woke up, drenched in sweat, with an uncomfortable feeling that I had done something terribly wrong. The next morning, Diana called me at the office, her voice trembling. "Something's wrong with the cat," she said. Moshe, our 12-year-old calico cat, was usually very gentle and relaxed. But according to Diana, she had suddenly become aggressive, growling, hissing, and scratching when Diana tried to pet her. "And she keeps staring at the clock," Diana added. "She sits in front of the clock for hours, back arched, fur bristling, as if confronting an invisible enemy." I told Diana that perhaps Moshe wasn't feeling well and we should take her to the vet. But deep down, I started to wonder if it had something to do with the clock and the fact that I had let it stop. Over the next few days, other strange things began to happen. Other clocks in the house started to run incorrectly, some faster, some slower, completely out of sync with each other. Objects in the house seemed to move when no one was there. Diana complained about footsteps in the middle of the night, even though there were only 2 of us in the house. But strangest of all was the impact on time itself. There were moments during the day when time seemed to stretch endlessly, minutes turning into hours. And at other times, hours seemed to pass in a flash. Diana and I began to lose our sense of time, unsure if it was morning or afternoon, Tuesday or Friday. All of this happened while the antique clock continued to tick steadily, each tick seeming to say, "I warned you, I warned you." After a week, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Lawrence, the man who sold me the clock, and told him what was happening. He was silent for a long time after I finished, then sighed heavily. "I tried to warn you," he said. "You let it stop, didn't you?" "Only for a day," I protested, and I wound it up again as soon as I realized. "A day, a minute, it doesn't matter," Lawrence said. The Zwerter doesn't just measure time, it protects it. When you let it stop, you broke the seal, and now time is leaking from your world, flowing erratically, sometimes slow, sometimes fast. That's ridiculous, I said, though I no longer felt so sure. Gustav Muller believed that time is not a simple linear flow from past to future, Lawrence continued. He believed it's like a deep ocean with currents and eddies, and that our world is just a small island in that sea of time. The Zwerter keeps the walls of time around our island solid, but when it stops, the walls start to leak. I shivered, feeling a terrible understanding dawn on me. So how do I fix this? You can't reverse it, Lawrence said, but you can stop it from getting worse. Never let the clock stop again. Wind it at the exact right time. And he paused. And what? I asked, feeling anxious. Answer when it calls, Lawrence said, his voice dropping to a whisper. At midnight, it will call your name. You must answer. I thanked Lawrence reluctantly and hung up, feeling somewhat incredulous. The entire conversation sounded like a spooky tale an old antique collector tells to prank a newcomer. But as I looked across the living room and saw Moshe still staring at the clock, fur bristling, I no longer felt so sure. That night, Diana and I went to bed early, both exhausted from the broken sleep of the past week. But exactly at midnight, I woke up to a strange sound. Not the familiar ticking of the clock, but a faint, distant voice, yet incredibly clear, calling my name. Marcus Blackwell. I sat up, trying not to wake Diana. The voice seemed to come from downstairs, from where the clock stood. I crept down the stairs, my heart pounding. The living room was bathed in darkness, only moonlight filtering through the curtain gaps. But the clock face of the grandfather clock was glowing with a strange blue light, and inside the glass case, the pendulum was swinging faster than usual, producing not a tick-tock, but a rhythmic sound almost like breathing. Marcus Blackwell, the voice spoke again, and this time I realized it was coming from the clock. You have disturbed the flow. I'm sorry, I said, feeling silly talking to a clock. I didn't mean to let it stop. What has happened cannot be undone, the voice continued. But the rift can be mended. You must pay a price. What price? I asked, a dreadful feeling rising in my heart. Time, the voice replied. Stolen time must be returned. 1 year from your life to mend the rift in time. 1 year, I repeated, shocked. 1 year, the voice confirmed. Give it willingly, or it will be taken, and more besides. I stood there trembling, weighing my options. A part of me still thought this was just a strange dream, or that I had gone insane. But another part, a deeper part, knew this was real. How, I asked eventually, how do I give a year from my life? Place your hand upon the clock face, the voice instructed, and say, I, Marcus Blackwell, freely give 1 year from my life to mend time. With trembling hand, I touched the brass clock face. It was ice cold beneath my fingers. I, Marcus Blackwell, I said, my voice cracking, freely give 1 year from my life to mend time. Immediately, I felt a searing pain from my fingertips, spreading up my arm, then flooding into my chest. I gasped, and it felt as if a part of me was being pulled out, not blood or flesh, but something invisible yet equally real, my very own time. I caught a fleeting glimpse of my future self, a little grayer, a few deeper wrinkles around my eyes as if I had just leaped forward a year. Then the pain vanished and I stumbled back. The voice from the clock spoke one last time. The bargain is struck. The seal is restored. Remember to keep me running, Marcus Blackwell. The clock face stopped glowing, and the pendulum returned to its normal, steady tick-tock. Moshe, our cat, suddenly appeared from nowhere and jumped into my lap, no longer frightened or aggressive, just our normal, lazy cat. The next morning, Diana remarked that I looked tired, and I swear your hair looks grayer, she said, tilting her head at me. Maybe you should cut back on work. I nodded and smiled, not telling her about my strange experience in the night. It would only worry her. Or worse, she might think I had lost my mind. But I knew what had happened was real. I had given a year from my life to mend the rift in time that my carelessness had created. A steep price, but perhaps a necessary one. Since then, I have never forgotten to wind the clock every Sunday. It still stands proudly in our living room, marking the steady rhythm of days and nights. Occasionally, when I'm alone late at night, I almost imagine hearing it whisper not in words, but in rhythmic ticks. Thank you, Marcus Blackwell. Thank you for restoring order. And I reply just as softly, you're welcome, just never ask for more. So far, it has kept its word. That was Marcus Blackwell's story. Indeed, he is genuinely a renowned antique clock collector with an impressive collection, including many rare items from around the world. I couldn't verify the story about this particular grandfather clock, but I did find documentation about a German clockmaker named Gustav Müller, who crafted clocks in the late 19th century. And he did have a reputation as a mystic who believed in the connection between time and other dimensions. What leaves me pondering more is that time is actually a more fragile thing than we imagine, not a simple flow, but a complex fabric that can be torn, mended, and sometimes warped. And perhaps there are objects, created by skilled hands and knowing minds, that can help keep that fabric intact. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still listening to Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short musical interlude. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from an email by Mia Winters, a 31-year-old woman working at an accounting firm in a downtown office building. She wrote to me in a tone I can only describe as bewildered and frightened. Listen to the experience Mia shared. When you work in a 24-story office building, elevators are an essential part of your daily life. I've worked at Everest Plaza for 3 years, and every day I take the elevator at least 4 times. Up to the 23rd floor in the morning, down and up again after lunch, then down at the end of the day. There are 6 elevators serving the building, and each one is identical. Shiny stainless steel walls, a large mirror at the back, and a modern control panel with touch buttons. Usually, they work very well, and most people in the building never think much about them. But I've started to notice. Have you ever felt like something was off in an elevator? Not a mechanical problem, but an uncomfortable feeling that you're not entirely alone in that small space, even when your eyes don't see anyone else. It all started about 2 months ago. I was working late finishing an important report. When I finally left the office, it was almost 10:00 p.m. and the building was deserted. I called the elevator and waited. Only the sound of the elevator moving broke the silence. When the door opened, I saw a man standing inside. This wasn't unusual, probably another colleague working late. But as I stepped in, I noticed something was wrong with this man. He wore a neat gray suit, but its style looked a bit outdated. He stood completely motionless in the corner of the elevator, staring straight ahead. I pressed the ground floor button and the elevator began to descend. "Working late?" I asked, trying to break the awkward silence. No answer. The man didn't even glance at me. I thought perhaps he was wearing wireless headphones or simply didn't want to talk, so I didn't press it. When the elevator stopped at the ground floor, I stepped out first and held the door open with my hand, a polite reflex. But the man remained still staring straight ahead. "Aren't you getting off?" I asked. Still no reaction. I let the door close, thinking perhaps he was going up. Although that didn't make sense since we were already on the highest floor with offices, and the floors above were just machinery and equipment. I pushed the incident out of my mind until 2 days later when I was working late again. This time, when the elevator opened, I saw the same man, the same gray suit, the same standing position, the same fixed gaze straight ahead. I hesitated a bit before stepping in, but then told myself I was being silly. Perhaps he was just a security guard or maintenance worker, and I had never noticed him before. I stepped in, pressed the ground floor button, and waited. This time, I decided to observe the man through his reflection in the mirror, and that's when I realized what made me feel uneasy. I couldn't see his reflection. The mirror only reflected my image and the rest of the elevator. But there was no man. My heart pounded, but I tried to remain calm. Perhaps it was just a strange angle or a lighting effect. I tried not to look directly at him, fearing he would notice my panic. When the elevator stopped at the ground floor, I practically darted out, not daring to look back. The next day, I told my colleague, Jessica, about the strange man in the elevator. I didn't mention the part about the reflection, afraid she would think I was crazy. "Wearing an old-fashioned gray suit and never speaking?" she asked, her face suddenly serious. My heart almost stopped. "Yes, you've met him." Jessica looked around the office, then lowered her voice. "That's the last one out of the elevator. That's what everyone in the building calls him. He's been appearing in the elevators for a while now, but only late at night and only when you're alone." "Who is he?" I asked. Jessica shook her head. "No one knows for sure, but there's a story. About 10 years ago, before this building was renovated, there was an accident. A man, an accountant like us, got trapped in an elevator when it plunged. He was the only one in the elevator and died on the spot. And you think the man in the elevator? I'm not saying I believe, Jessica quickly said. I'm just telling you what people say. They say he sometimes appears to those who work late. If you happen to encounter him, never get out of the elevator before him. Why not? Because people say he's looking for a replacement, Jessica said, her voice dropping to a whisper. If you get out of the elevator before him, he'll never leave the elevator and you'll never leave this building. I laughed, trying to sound casual, but feeling a chill run down my spine. That's just office ghost stories. Maybe so, Jessica nodded. But why not be careful just in case? If you see him again, just let him go first. I didn't want to admit it, but Jessica's story haunted me. That evening, I deliberately left the office before 6:00 p.m. when the building was still crowded. And for the next few days, I did the same. But then, an important project came up, and I was forced to work late again. That night, when I called the elevator at 9:30 p.m., I silently prayed it would be empty. But when the door opened, he was there. The man in the gray suit stood in the exact same position with the exact same posture. I stood there frozen, unsure what to do. A part of me wanted to wait for another elevator, but I knew that was silly just because of an office ghost story. I took a deep breath and stepped in, carefully maintaining my distance from the man. The elevator began to descend. "Which floor?" I asked instinctively, even though I knew I wouldn't get an answer. And sure enough, the man remained silent. But this time, when I glanced, I saw him looking directly at me through his reflection in the mirror. That was impossible because I still couldn't see his reflection. But somehow, I knew he was looking at me, and he was smiling. When the elevator stopped at the ground floor, I remembered Jessica's warning. I stood still, waiting for the man to exit first, but he didn't move. "After you," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. He still stood still smiling in the mirror where I knew he couldn't be reflected. The elevator doors began to close. By reflex, I reached out to block them, and in that moment the man finally moved. He leaned towards me and whispered in my ear, "How polite, but I can't leave here. Never." "Nor can you." I didn't wait for him to finish. I jumped out of the elevator, almost stumbling in the process. When I turned back, I caught a glimpse of the man's face as the door closed, no longer smiling, but full of anger. Since then, I have never taken the elevator alone again. I always make sure I leave the office with others. Or if I'm forced to work late, I'll take the stairs, even if it means descending 23 floors. I've recounted this story to several other colleagues, and surprisingly, many have encountered the last one out of the elevator. Some say they've seen him in different elevators. Some say he sometimes changes his standing position. But there's one common point. He only appears when you're alone, and he never exits the elevator first. I don't know who he is or what he wants. Perhaps he truly is the ghost of the man who died in the elevator accident. Or perhaps he's another type of phenomenon, an entity attached to the building in some way. But one thing I know for sure, I will never be the last one to leave the elevator when he's in it. Because I have a feeling that's exactly what he wants, for someone to take his place, while he finally gets to be free. That was Mia Winter's story. After receiving her email, I contacted the management of Everest Plaza to learn more. They confirmed that in 2013, there was a serious elevator accident in the building that killed a 42-year-old accountant named Robert Gray. According to the report, he was working late and was the only one in the elevator when the braking system failed. Interestingly, the building management also admitted that many employees had reported seeing a strange man in the elevators late at night. But all security cameras only recorded them alone. The building even had to hire a feng shui consultant and a priest to bless the elevators, although they claimed this was just to appease staff concerns. Perhaps small, enclosed spaces like elevators, where we are temporarily cut off from the outside world, are ideal places for restless spirits to find solace. Or perhaps when we are alone in that small space, we become more sensitive to other realities that exist parallel to our world. So, the next time you take an elevator alone late at night, look carefully at the person accompanying you. And if they stand too still, stare too fixedly, or you can't see their reflection in the mirror, remember to always let them exit first. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still watching Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break. Hello, dear listeners, Morgan Hayes here. Thank you for staying with Late Night Radio Stories. The next story comes from a letter by Lily Reeves, a 12-year-old girl living with her parents in a quiet suburb. Normally, I would hesitate to share a story from someone so young. But after speaking with Lily's parents and verifying some details, I believe this story deserves to be heard. I moved into our new house with my parents last summer, just as I turned 11. My dad got a new job in another city, so we had to leave our familiar friends and neighbors. I was sad to move, but Mom promised the new house would be great. It had a big backyard, an attic I could turn into my own space, and even a big tree perfect for a treehouse. Our new house was quite old, built in the 1940s, but it had been renovated many times. My bedroom was on the second floor with a large window overlooking the backyard and a spacious, built-in closet. My favorite thing was the full-length mirror attached to the closet door. It had an old wooden frame intricately carved with flowers and leaves. At first, everything was normal. I spent the summer exploring the new neighborhood and trying to make friends. But it was hard being the new kid, especially since most of the kids in the area had known each other for years. So, I often spent time alone in my room, reading or playing games on my computer. Then one night, about 2 weeks after we moved in, I woke up in the middle of the night. Nothing woke me, no strange noises or nightmares. I just suddenly felt wide awake, as if I had slept enough, even though it was only 12:17 a.m. according to the digital clock beside my bed. Darkness didn't completely cover the room. Moonlight shone through the window, creating strange shadows on the walls. I looked around, and my eyes stopped at the mirror on the closet door. There was something strange about it. Even though the room was dark, the image in the mirror was full of light, as if it were reflecting another bedroom identical to mine, but in daylight. I sat up in bed, rubbing my eyes. I must still be dreaming, I thought, but when I looked back at the mirror, I realized it wasn't just the light that was different. In the mirror, there was a little girl sitting on a bed identical to mine, looking straight at me. She looked a lot like me, the same long brown hair, the same big brown eyes, the same small nose with freckles, but it wasn't me. The girl in the mirror was wearing a classic white nightgown, not the t-shirt and shorts I was wearing. And she was smiling, a gentle, almost sad smile. I should have been scared. I should have screamed and run to my parents' room. But for some reason, I didn't feel afraid. Instead, I felt curious and perhaps a little lonely too. I climbed out of bed and walked to the mirror. "Hello," I whispered. The little girl in the mirror waved back. Her mouth moved, but I heard no sound. "I can't hear you," I said, pointing to my ear. The girl nodded, seeming to understand. She looked down for a moment as if thinking, then suddenly raised her hand and touched the mirror from her side. I don't know why, but I raised my hand and placed my palm on the mirror, opposite her hand. Instead of the cold sensation of glass, I felt a strange warmth spreading from my fingertips, as if I was touching something alive. I pulled my hand back, startled. The girl in the mirror also withdrew her hand and smiled sadly. That night, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. I told myself it was just a strange dream or the overactive imagination of a lonely child in a new place. But the next night, I woke up again at exactly 12:17, and once again, the little girl was waiting in the mirror, smiling at me. This time, she had a small notebook and a pencil. She wrote something, then held it up for me to see. "Hello, my name is Alice. Who are you?" I quickly grabbed my diary and a pen from my desk drawer. "I'm Lily," I wrote and held it up. "Are you a ghost?" Alice laughed and shook her head. She wrote, "Not really. I'm just on the other side of the mirror." "Where is the other side?" I asked. "It's like your world, but different," she replied. "I lived in this room 70 years ago." I stared at the words, feeling a chill. "You're 70 years old?" Alice shook her head and wrote, "I'm forever 11 here. Time is different on this side." "Did you die?" I asked timidly. There was a long pause as Alice looked down, then wrote, "I had scarlet fever. It hurt a lot. Then I woke up here on the other side of the mirror." My heart ached for this lonely little girl. "Are you sad?" "Sometimes," Alice replied, "but I can look through the mirror. I see all the families who live in this room, watch them grow up and move away, but no one sees me except you." "Why can I see you?" Alice bowed her head as if listening to someone speak. "Because you needed a friend," she finally wrote, "and so did I." From that night on, Alice and I became friends. Every night at exactly 12:17, I would wake up and we would talk through our notebooks. She told me about her life in the 50s, about the radio shows she liked, the games she played, and her family. I told her about school, about the internet and smartphones, and how hard it was to be the new kid. Alice became my best friend. Every night I looked forward to 12:17 to see her. And even though we could only talk for about an hour before I got too sleepy, our conversations helped me feel less lonely in my new house and city. One night I asked Alice if she could leave the mirror. "No," she wrote, "I've tried. This is where I belong now." "Can you see other people like me?" I asked. "Sometimes, when they are also on the other side of the mirror," she replied, "but most of them just pass through. They don't stay like me." "Why do you stay?" Alice took a moment to answer that question. "Finally," she wrote, "I was waiting for someone. I think it was you." The answer confused me, but I didn't ask more about it. The summer passed, and as school started, I gradually got used to my new life. I made friends with some kids in my class and even got invited to sleepovers. When I told Alice about my new friends, she seemed both happy and sad. "I'm so happy for you," she wrote. "You won't be lonely anymore." One October night, I woke up but didn't see Alice in the mirror. Instead, the mirror only reflected my normal darkroom. I waited, but she didn't appear. The next night was the same, and the night after that. I started to worry. What happened to Alice? Had she left without saying goodbye, or had I imagined her all along? A week later, when I had almost given up hope, I woke up at 12:17 and saw Alice in the mirror. But she looked different, brighter, clearer, and she seemed happier. "Where did you go?" I wrote, tears streaming down my cheeks. "I found what I was waiting for," she replied. "What was it?" I asked. "A real friend," she wrote. "Someone to say goodbye to. No one stayed long enough before. They were all too scared or didn't believe or were too busy. But you stayed. You became my friend." "Are you leaving?" I asked, tears falling onto the page. Alice nodded. "It's time, but I couldn't leave without saying goodbye and thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For helping me not be lonely anymore," she wrote. "And you too, you're not lonely anymore, are you?" I shook my head, still crying. "Don't be sad," Alice wrote. "I'm going to a good place and you have a beautiful life ahead. Promise me you'll live it to the fullest." "I promise," I wrote. Alice placed her hand on the mirror one last time. I placed my hand on it, feeling the familiar warmth. Then slowly, her image faded until only my reflection remained in the mirror. The next morning, I found a small, old box in the corner of my closet. Inside were an old rag doll, some faded photographs, and a small diary. The diary belonged to Alice Thompson, who had lived in this house and died of scarlet fever in 1953 at the age of 11. The last page of the diary, written in adult handwriting, probably Alice's mother, read, "Our dear Alice passed away today. The last thing she said was that she was afraid of being lonely. She promised to wait until she found a friend. I hope one day she will find that friend." I never saw Alice in the mirror again, but I kept her diary and her doll. And every night before bed, I look in the mirror and say, "Good night, Alice," just in case she's still watching from somewhere. Sometimes I still wake up at 12:17, but instead of feeling scared or lonely, I feel a strange warmth, as if someone is watching over me. As if a friend from the other side of the mirror is still caring for me. That was Lily Reeves' story. After receiving this letter, I contacted Lily's parents to verify the authenticity of the story. They confirmed that Lily had indeed found an old box of items in her closet containing a doll and a diary belonging to a girl named Alice who had lived in the house in the 1950s. They also confirmed that after researching the house's history, they discovered that a girl named Alice Thompson had indeed died of scarlet fever there in 1953. Sometimes, what souls need is not recognition or justice, but simply a connection, a friend to share their loneliness and say goodbye. And sometimes, those friends can come from the most unexpected places, even from the other side of a mirror. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still watching Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back, dear listeners, to Late Night Radio Stories. I'm Morgan Hayes. The next story comes from a man named Samuel Tucker, a 45-year-old writer who moved to the countryside to find inspiration for his new novel. He emailed me a few weeks ago with a tone I can only describe as haunting. Listen to Samuel's story. I always thought I wasn't easily scared. As a writer of psychological thrillers and horror, I had researched far scarier things than anything I'd ever encountered in real life. At least, I thought so, until I moved to the house in Ravens Creek. It was a small house on the edge of the forest, about 10 miles from the nearest town. I rented it for 6 months, intending to live in isolation to finish the novel I had been putting off for too long. No nearby neighbors, no television, and spotty internet exactly what I needed to focus. The first 3 weeks went quite smoothly. I woke early, wrote all day, and in the evenings often took walks in the forest to clear my head. The forest was eerily beautiful, towering oak and pine trees, rich vegetation. And sometimes I even saw deer and rabbits. Then one afternoon, as I walked further than usual on the trail, I heard a child's cry. At first, I thought I was mistaken. Perhaps it was just the wind through the leaves or some bird. But then I heard it again, a small, clear, painful sob, as if coming from a child trying to suppress crying. I stood motionless, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound. It seemed to come from ahead, deeper in the forest, where the trail veered into a thick area of trees. "Hello, is anyone there?" I called out loudly. No answer, just the soft crying continuing. I moved forward, pushing through bushes and rocks. The crying would occasionally stop, then resume, but it never seemed to get closer no matter how far I walked. The sun began to set, and I realized I had gone much further than intended. With reluctance, I decided to turn back. Perhaps it was just a prank by a child from town, or fatigue making me imagine sounds. That night, I had a restless sleep. I dreamed of the forest, of the trees stretching their branch-like arms towards me, and of that crying small, sad, and lonely. The next morning, I called my landlady, Mrs. Harrison, and asked if any families lived nearby. "No one for miles," she said. "That's why writers like you like it there, quiet and isolated." "So, are there any campsites nearby?" I asked. I thought I heard children crying in the forest. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Mr. Tucker," Mrs. Harrison finally spoke, "you heard crying." "Yes," I said. "Like a child. I tried to find who it was, but I couldn't pinpoint the exact location." Another pause, then she sighed. "I suppose you'll hear about it sooner or later. The locals call it Emily's cry." Emily Carter, 8 years old. She got lost in the forest about 30 years ago in 1990. A family hike turned tragic when she ran off to play and couldn't find her way back. They searched for days police, firefighters, volunteers, sniffer dogs, even helicopters, but they never found her. My throat was dry. And the crying. People say that sometimes, on late afternoons, you can hear Emily crying in the forest, still trying to find her way home. Many people have heard it over the years. Some have tried to follow the crying, but it always leads them deeper into the woods, and they never find its source. "Do you believe it?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. "I don't know what to believe," Mrs. Harrison admitted, "but I know that many people have heard it. People not easily swayed by ghost stories. Sober, practical people like you, Mr. Tucker." After that call, I tried to focus on my writing, but my mind kept returning to that crying and Emily's story. I told myself it was just a local legend, that there must be a logical explanation for the sound I had heard. But my curiosity won out. I drove to the nearest town library and searched for information about Emily Carter. And sure enough, I found articles from the summer of 1990 about an 8-year-old girl who went missing in the forest. The articles described the extensive search, the family's despair, and finally, the disappointment when the search efforts were called off after 2 weeks with no results. The last article was a year later when Emily was declared dead. There was a photo of her, a blonde child with a radiant smile and a missing front tooth. Beside the photo were images of her parents, their faces drawn with grief. When I returned to the house, I decided not to go into the forest anymore, at least not alone. I focused on my writing and only went out when necessary. But 3 days later, as I sat on my porch in the late afternoon, I heard it again, that small cry echoing from the forest in the distance. This time it wasn't like suppressed crying anymore. It was like a small but clear call, as if Emily was calling out to someone. Calling to me. I stood up, straining to listen. The crying stopped, then after a long silence, a small, very small, but incredibly clear voice replied, Someone? Hello. Goosebumps erupted all over my body. I swallowed, trying to remain calm. Emily, I called. My name is Sam. I've come to help you. I'm lost, the voice replied, closer now. I can't find Mom and Dad. I know, I said, sweeping my flashlight around, trying to pinpoint the sound's location. You've been lost for a very long time. I want to go home. The voice cried out, clear pain in it. Suddenly, I saw a movement at the edge of my flashlight's beam. I quickly shone the light in that direction, and for an instant, I saw it a small figure, seemingly a child, standing among the trees. But as soon as I shone directly on it, the figure vanished. Emily, don't be afraid, I called. I won't hurt you. I want to help you find your way home. Where is home? The voice asked, now coming from a different direction. I turned towards the sound but saw nothing again. For many minutes, we continued this strange cat-and-mouse game. I tried to get closer to the voice, but each time I thought I was nearing it, it moved. Then, just as I was starting to think I would never find the source of the voice, I stumbled upon something, a small pile of stones stacked on top of each other, like a cairn, a marker on a forest path. Emily, I called, shining my flashlight onto the cairn. No answer, but as I looked closer, I noticed the ground around the pile of stones looked different, disturbed. I knelt down and touched the earth. It was softer than the rest of the forest, as if it had been dug up and filled back in. With a pounding heart, I began to dig. At first, only with my hands, then with a wooden stick I found nearby. Soon, I had dug down about a foot, and then my stick hit something hard. I carefully dug around it, and as I brushed away the dirt, I saw what it was, a piece of faded blue fabric, and beneath it, something small and white that I recognized with horror as a bone. I recoiled, shocked and terrified. I had just found Emily Carter after 30 years. I pulled out my cell phone and by some miracle found enough signal to call Sheriff Ross. I tried to explain my location as clearly as possible, and he promised to send a team immediately. While waiting, I sat near the cairn, trembling from both cold and shock. I didn't hear the crying anymore, but sometimes I felt a gentle presence beside me, like a small hand placed on my shoulder. You'll be home soon, Emily, I whispered into the darkness. I promise. The police arrived 2 hours later, with floodlights and equipment. They told me to stand back as they cordoned off the scene and began to carefully dig. As I suspected, they found the remains of a child, along with fragments of a blue dress and a small shoe. How did you find this place? Sheriff Ross asked me, his voice a mix of skepticism and astonishment. I told him about the crying, about how it seemed to lead me to this exact spot. He shook his head, but I could see in his eyes that he believed me. Subsequent investigations confirmed that they were indeed the remains of Emily Carter. Based on the location and condition of the body, the police concluded that she had fallen into a crevice in the rocks, broken her leg, and couldn't climb out. She most likely died of exposure or dehydration. Later, forest animals might have dragged some of the fragments to the surface where someone, perhaps a hiker or hunter, found them and respectfully buried them, marking the grave with the pile of stones. The mystery remains as to why the initial search didn't find this spot, as it wasn't too far from the main trail. Perhaps the search team missed it, or perhaps the burial happened after the search ended. We will never know for sure. Emily's family was informed, and her mother, now an elderly woman, returned to attend the reburial. She thanked me, tears streaming down her wrinkled face, and said that she could finally find peace after 30 years of suffering. I returned to the house and finished my novel. But it was no longer a horror novel. Instead, it became a story of loss, hope, and how spirits sometimes find ways to lead us to the truth. I still walk in the forest every afternoon, but now, instead of fear, I feel a strange peace. And although I never hear that crying anymore, sometimes as dusk falls, I imagine hearing a child's gentle laughter echoing among the trees, free and finally happy. That was Samuel Tucker's story. I checked the news reports and confirmed that Emily Carter's remains were indeed found in the forest near Ravens Creek last year, 30 years after she went missing. According to reports, it was a writer staying in the area who discovered the location, although the media did not mention any strange details about how he found it. Perhaps sometimes the departed cannot rest not because they have something frightening to share, but simply because they want to be found, to be remembered, and to be brought home. And perhaps when we are brave enough to listen, they will lead us to the truth. This is Morgan Hayes, and you're still watching Late Night Radio Stories. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this short break.